The Tehran air was thick with anticipation, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Streetlights flickered in the gloom, casting long shadows over cracked pavements and sand-colored walls. A boy on a bicycle no older than 10 pedaled silently past shuttered stalls, his eyes darting toward the sky. Somewhere far above, an engine purred, too quiet to be local, in a narrow apartment overlooking Valley Asr Street. An old man sipped tea with trembling hands. He hadn't spoken in hours. Across from him, his granddaughter tugged at her sleeves, nervous. She broke the silence. "Do you think it's true?" He didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the small photo beside the lamp. His son disappeared 5 years ago. That photo said everything. The regime's grip hadn't loosened in decades, it had evolved. Fear wasn't just in the law. It was in the air, in the silence of public places, in the way people avoided each other's eyes. Daily life was a balancing act between obedience and invisibility. Checkpoints dotted the streets like scars, and walls carried layers of painted-over dissent. Whispers had returned to the city, spreading like smoke. Someone was leaking information. Not from outside, Iran had grown used to foreign threats, but from within. It wasn't just leaflets or encrypted broadcasts. This time it was plans, locations, patterns. The kind of knowledge only an insider could possess. Reza had once worn the uniform. He knew the weight of the badge, the sting of the orders. His mother had cried when he enlisted. Now, years later, her picture hung from a nail above his desk, reminding him who he was before he believed in fear. He moved like someone who'd practiced disappearing. No phone, no digital trail. When he handed off the documents, coded, wrapped in cigarette foil, slipped under a brick in a courtyard garden, he felt nothing.
No thrill, no guilt.
Only a strange emptiness, like a breath drawn too deeply. Reza hadn't planned to betray the system. He just couldn't forget the screams. The ones in the hallway when the interrogators worked past midnight. The ones he once told himself were necessary. He had memorized maps, cataloged weapons caches, noted patrol shifts. Quietly, carefully, until everything the regime hid became fuel for its undoing. The strike didn't come with a warning. It came with silence. Then the sky tore open. Distant rumbles rolled over rooftops like angry thunder. The ground shook beneath apartment towers. A flash, white and searing, lit up the southern horizon. Birds erupted from trees. Sirens wailed too late. In less than 4 minutes, communications hubs, surveillance towers, and elite guard outposts across the city went dark. From his rooftop, Reza watched a column of smoke rise where once there had been a command center. He felt no triumph. Only stillness. In the chaos, regime loyalists scrambled. Some to retaliate, some to flee. Soldiers, stripped of orders, wandered through broken courtyards. Entire blocks blinked out of power. In the distance, someone was singing, faint and off-key. What mattered most wasn't what was destroyed. It was what had changed. The regime had always counted on total control. Fear, surveillance, silence. Now silence had become its weakness. Because as power lines fell and command systems crashed, the people beneath them heard something new. They heard possibility. Reza pulled a notebook from his coat. Inside were names, not of targets but of allies. Nurses, disillusioned officers, students who knew how to bypass firewalls. He didn't know what came next, but he understood what had ended. In a nearby alley, a teenage boy with a bandaged arm helped an old woman across a smoking crater. She offered him a fig from her pocket. He smiled, teeth missing. In the north, beyond the governor's compound, someone spray-painted a wall. "We are not afraid." The word stayed longer than any poster. Beneath a broken satellite dish, a child stared at the stars. She asked her father, "Will it be like this tomorrow?" He looked up, his voice catching in his throat. "No," he said. "Tomorrow will be louder." Smoke clung to the streets like fog, curling into open windows and settling over abandoned cars. In the half-light of dawn, Tehran was unrecognizable, not from the destruction alone, but from the silence that followed. Gone was the echo of boots on pavement, the bark of orders, the constant hum of watchful drones. What remained was fragile, uncertain, and entirely human. General Amini had not slept. His office, once adorned with medals, polished mahogany, and portraits of loyalty, was now a shattered shell. The mirror on the far wall had cracked down the middle, splitting his reflection in two. He could not reconcile them. Outside, the last of his officers argued over strategy they no longer believed in. Inside, he sat still, uniform stained, waiting for orders that would never come. The authority he clung to for decades had vanished with a single night's precision. Elsewhere, the city stirred. Not in panic, but in motion. People walked. Not ran. Not hid. They walked in the still-burning neighborhoods. Civilians formed human chains to move debris. A teenage boy used a shopping cart to ferry the wounded to an old clinic. No one asked who he was. No one asked who the wounded were. Enemies and allies no longer wore colors. Fatima, a nurse who hadn't left her neighborhood in days, turned her home into a makeshift ward. She worked with trembling hands but steady eyes. When someone brought her a regime soldier with shrapnel in his leg, she hesitated only long enough to check his pulse. "You're safe here," she said, though she didn't believe it yet. Kindness had been currency in hiding. Now it was becoming LW.1 had expected the absence of control to feel like a kind of order. In grocery lines, people shared without speaking. Bottled water passed hand to hand. An elderly man gave his only can of beans to a child in a mud-stained school uniform. She smiled and walked away without a word. The regime's fall hadn't been declared. But it was felt. In the way people stopped whispering. In the way they stopped looking over their shoulders. In a mosque courtyard once monitored by hidden cameras, a group of teenagers passed out bread and pamphlets. The pamphlets didn't call for revenge. They listed locations of safe zones, hospitals, working radios, messages of unity written in smudged ink. "Tell your neighbors," one boy said, pressing a leaflet into a stranger's palm. "We built from here." The resistance wasn't a single body anymore. It was 1,000 small hands stitching a wounded city back together. In basements that had once held dissidents, families now found shelter. One father, still bruised from a past interrogation, helped his neighbor, an officer's widow, carry her child through the rubble. Neither spoke of the past. A former schoolteacher cleared chalk dust from her old classroom, preparing it again for lessons. On the board she wrote, "Today we learn how to listen." Trust was slow, but visible. In one neighborhood, street artists emerged with paint cans and brushes. They covered walls once splashed with propaganda in color and poetry. One mural showed hands lifting the city above a sea of flames. Another depicted a young girl reading by candlelight, surrounded by flowers. Art, once erased in minutes by patrols, now stayed up for days. It was not peace. But it was something that could become peace. Underground leaders moved carefully. No central authority, no titles, no declarations of victory. They spoke in low voices and planned with caution. The priority was protection, of food, of medicine, of stories. They had learned the cost of being seen too early. Now they learned the power of being everywhere instead. Reza resurfaced only once during this time. In a small gathering in the back of a bookstore, he read out coordinates. People took notes. They didn't clap. They just nodded and moved. His voice had changed. It carried weight, not pride. "I'm not your leader," he said. "You lead yourselves. That's the point." Outside, a child played with a charred drone casing, pretending it was a toy spaceship. Her mother watched with tears she didn't understand. Even loyalists, those who had once enforced the order, felt the shift. Some begged forgiveness. Others stayed silent, uncertain whether to hide or help. A few walked into public squares with their hands raised. No arrests followed. Only questions. Only second chances. Forgiveness didn't come easily. It was not expected. But it arrived sometimes in small doses. A loaf of bread handed to a known informer. A jacket wrapped around a former officer in the cold. Fatima was asked once why she treated those who had once kicked down her door. She replied, "Because someone has to start." Change didn't announce itself. It grew through the cracks of fear. It found its shape in shared glances, in silent aid, in the rebuilding of what the regime had tried to burn away. And through it all, the sky remained clear. No new bombs fell. No foreign boots touched the ground. What had begun with fire now continued in mercy. A city that once bowed its head now looked each other in the eyes.